Legend has it humans only access 10% of their brain capacity. But even that 10% can already make humans do a lot of things. So, what happens if we can access 100% of our brain capacity?
What would happen if, for some reason, we ignore somebody unlocked 100% of their cerebral capacity?
100%.
Yes.
This was once highlighted in the movie Lucy. Lucy, who became a victim of illegal drug trafficking, accidentally had her body exposed to a drug called CPH4. The drug allowed Lucy to gradually increase her brain capacity from 20% to 50% to 100%. So what happened? Lucy transformed from a weak woman into a superwoman. Her intelligence multiplied many times over, allowing her to learn everything in a short time. And getting closer to 100%, his abilities are beyond comprehension. He can read minds, do telepathy, even manipulate space and time. So, is what Lucy described true? That all this time we've only accessed 10% of our brain's capacity? Rumor has it Einstein was one of the people who could access over 20%, which is why he was a genius. Is that true?
But tonight we have a better idea about what made Albert Einstein smarter than the rest. It's not about what he learned. Dana's going to tell us the shape of his brain. It was extraordinary.
Now, if you look at Einstein's brain, you can see completely different.
Because of that, guys, prepare your minds and your faith, because we're going to delve into events that could drive you crazy.
Albert Einstein may have been the world's greatest.
Genius. But what made him so smart?
Tonight, CBS 4's Dr. Sean Niff shows us the bizarre story of what happened to Einstein's brain after he died.
Let's first discuss an interesting story about Einstein's brain, that Einstein's brain was once stolen. Einstein died in 1955 at the age of 76. He died due to an aneurysm in his aorta. The media were buzzing with news of his death. Interestingly, before he died, Einstein expressed that he didn't want to be idolized after his death. Considering that he was idolized by many, he requested that his body be cremated. His ashes were scattered in secret without the public knowing. Now, at the time, the one responsible for Einstein's autopsy was Thomas Harvey, a pathologist. During the autopsy, Dr. Harvey was very curious about one thing: Einstein's brain. He wondered if Einstein's genius was related to the anatomy of his brain. So Dr. Harvey asked Hans Albert, Einstein's son, for permission to remove and study Einstein's brain. Hans agreed with the condition that it had to be done by the end of the autopsy and that the brain had to be returned to be cremated with the body. But what happened? Secretly, Dr. Harvey did not return the brain. Instead, he kept it and took it home without his family's permission and without anyone's knowledge. And he kept it hidden for 23 years without being detected. Until 23 years later, in 1978, a journalist named Stephen Levy suspected that Einstein's brain was still around. He read a biography of Einstein written by Ronald Clark. In that book, it was mentioned that Einstein himself once requested for his brain to be preserved for study. So the question is, where is Einstein's brain?
Clark said that Einstein wanted his brain preserved for study. And Michael wondered what happens at the brain. He never heard about it. So he looked at every medical journal he could find, and he looked for any publication, couldn't find a thing.
So Stephen Levy conducted an investigation to find Einstein's brain. From the information he got from Princeton Hospital before Einstein was autopsied, the last person to see Einstein's body was Dr. Harvey. Unfortunately, Dr. Harvey disappeared after that.
So, I started my research at the place you're looking at now, Princeton Hospital. I went to Walter Seligman, the vice president, who confirmed the autopsy took place and the brain was removed by Dr. Harvey, but he said Dr. Harvey had left long ago, taken all the records with him, and he had no idea where he was.
Fortunately, there was a doctor who had met Dr. Harvey. He saw Dr. Harvey Maisa, Dr. Harvey carrying samples of Einstein's brain and asked him to study them.
Would you mind putting that away?
Apparently, Dr. Harvey had been moving from place to place, either hiding or trying to unlock Einstein's brain secrets. It was from that doctor that Stephen Levy finally managed to contact Dr. Harvey.
That night, I dialed the number, and an answer came, and I said, is this the same Dr. Thomas Harvey who worked at Princeton Hospital in 1955? And there was a pause, almost as if the person was deciding whether to answer or not.
At first, Dr. Harvey refused to be interviewed, but in the end, with Stephen Levy's persuasion, Dr. Harvey finally agreed to talk.
And that next morning, it was a Saturday morning, very rainy morning, I took a taxi from my hotel to the lab where Dr. Harvey worked.
Stephen Levy was shocked to discover that Dr. Harvey had been preserving Einstein's brain all this time in 2 large containers filled with preservative. Einstein's brain had been cut into 240 pieces. Dr. Harvey also kept dozens of photos of Einstein's brain from various angles when the brain was still intact.
And in there, I could see like a pinkish, conch-shaped mass, sort of a chunk of gray, spongy matter, and some things that look like bloated dental floss. And he puts it down and said, here's Einstein's cerebellum. This is a chunk of his cerebral cortex. And these are, the brain aorta.
News about the discovery of Einstein's brain went viral. And eventually, Dr. Harvey had to hand over Einstein's brain to the museum, and various studies began to be conducted. Now, let's discuss what researchers have said about Einstein's brain. The first study comes from Sandra Wilson, a brain expert from Canada. From the photos taken by Dr. Harvey, it turns out Einstein's brain is relatively smaller compared to the average human brain. But interestingly, the back part of Einstein's brain, called the parietal lobe, is 15% wider than a normal brain.
Now, if you look at Einstein's brain, you can see it's completely different. This is relatively narrow. This is a normal human brain. All the brains I've ever looked at are like this. Einstein's brain was amazingly wide.
And in this part, there is an area related to visual and spatial abilities. So according to Dr. Sandra Wilson, this is what gave Einstein the visual abilities to solve physics and math problems, like when he formulated the theory of general relativity in 4 dimensions.
What my own work has been involved in is not just the anatomy of the brain, but how it supports cognition. The blue area, visual interpretation, that's very important for visual imagery. And that is also the region that one would expect was crucial in Albert Einstein's thinking when he was developing the theory of relativity.
Interestingly, in a normal brain, there is usually a separating line called the Sylvian fissure. This line separates the upper and lower parts of the brain. Strangely, in Einstein's brain, this line was interrupted, making the part of the brain related to visual functions even wider. That's why it's no surprise that Einstein was very imaginative. Almost all of his theories were formulated without experiments in his field, but he did it in the realm of thought, or what is commonly called a thought experiment.
Picture, if you will, the vastness of space, and through it, a framework of invisible lines, like wire mesh, supporting a pillar of concrete. Yet, unlike rigid wire, this gridwork is curved.
He actually, in his own writings and his biographers, has quoted himself saying how he doesn't think in words, but he thinks in pictures, he thinks in images.
That was just the first study. The second study came from Dr. Marion Diamond, a brain expert from America. She found that Einstein's glial cells were actually more numerous than in a normal brain. Glial cells are cells that provide nutrition to nerve cells while also protecting them. Thus, these glial cells play an important role in maximizing nerve function.
Glia actually refers to glue. The way they were originally defined is the glue of the nervous system. If any of these cells become dysfunctional, that will impact neurons as well, and neurons will also become dysfunctional.
Therefore, Dr. Marion said, this is what makes Einstein superior at absorbing and processing information.
So, we were using the data that we had accumulated over the years on experimental work to hypothesize that Einstein might have more glial cells than the average male.
And another study also mentioned that Einstein's corpus callosum was thicker. The corpus callosum is the part of the brain that connects the left and right hemispheres. So, with the thicker corpus callosum, communication between both sides of Einstein's brain is faster. This might be what makes Einstein not only proficient in science, but also able to blend it with art. Einstein was a violin player. Interestingly, the reason he continued playing the violin, they say, helps them think.
Not married, sorry. Mozart helps me think.
There are some studies on Einstein's brain, but is it true that the anatomy of his brain was the reason for his genius? Scientists debate this. Some agree, some don't. But aside from that, let's answer the question posed earlier. Do we really only use 10% of our brain's capacity? Was Einstein a genius because he could access more than that? Turns out, guys, that's just a myth. Even Lucy's director, Luc Besson, knows that what's told in the movie is just a myth.
You know that the theory of the 10% is wrong. Yeah, of course, it's wrong. I know it. I worked on the thing for 9 years, but guys, it's a film.
Then where did this myth come from? There are many conflicting stories about who first made this statement, but if traced, this myth started from a misunderstanding of William James' statement, the father of American psychology. In the 1900s, William James studied the development of a prodigy named William Sidis, whose IQ was higher than Einstein. Even at the age of 11, he was admitted to Harvard. From his research on William Sidis, William James then made a statement. Humans only use a small portion of their overall mental potential. What William James meant was more about mental capacity, not the brain. And William James didn't mention any percentages. But somehow, the media misinterpreted his statement and linked it to the brain. In fact, that's not the case. All brain research shows that no part of our brain is idle. Precisely because it functions 100%, scientists can map the brain part by part based on its functions. That's why Thomas Harvey cut Einstein's brain into 240 pieces. The question is, if all brains function 100% similarly, why are there geniuses like Einstein? Here's something interesting. Although the use of 10% of the human brain's capacity is just a myth, not all the information in the movie Lucy is wrong.
But most of the rest, there's lots of information that were totally real in the film.
There are more connections in the human body than there are stars in the galaxy.
Yes, the information is true that the number of connections in the human brain is more than the number of stars in the galaxy. This is because the number of nerve cells in the human brain reaches 100 billion nerve cells. And each nerve cell can be connected with thousands of other nerve cells, forming a neural network, yeah.